New Year's Eve was supposed to be this big cinematic moment. Ball drops, confetti, champagne kisses. Instead, I was standing outside some stranger's high-rise apartment in a thin jacket and wet socks, trying not to gag from the mix of cigarette smoke and spilled vodka on the sidewalk. I didn't even want to go to that party. But peer pressure at work is undefeated, especially when it's wrapped in sparkly dresses and group chats full of coworkers saying, "It's gonna be epic." It wasn't. My friends vanished before midnight, chasing hookups and good lighting. I lost track of the one person I actually trusted to get me home, my friend Sasha, after she took 2 shots and made out with a guy in a sequin blazer. So there I was, refreshing the Uber app with no luck and debating whether walking 3 miles in freezing slush would be better than sleeping on a couch that smelled like Axe body spray and regret. Then I heard someone say my name. "Jason?" I turned around and saw him. Eli. We worked together in the same department, though work together was generous. He was quiet, the guy who always had headphones in and somehow knew how to fix the office printer when IT didn't show up. I'd talked to him maybe 3 times in the last year. He always seemed removed, but not in a rude way. More like he was watching the world from a few steps back. "Hey," I said, trying to sound less miserable than I felt. "Didn't know you were here." "Yeah," he said, hands in his coat pockets. "I left like an hour ago, came back to grab my friend, but he bailed. You need a ride?" My brain short-circuited for a second. "Wait, seriously?" He nodded. "I'm parked around the corner. If you're heading toward Uptown, I can drop you." Yeah, that'd be amazing. Thanks." The words stumbled out before I could overthink it. I followed him down the street, boots squishing with every step. Neither of us said much, but the quiet didn't feel awkward. It felt like a pause. A breath. Eli's car was older but clean, with that faint scent of wintergreen and old fabric seats. He unlocked it, and I climbed in, shaking out my wet sleeves. The heat was already on. Soft music was playing, some instrumental playlist that sounded like it was made for driving through empty cities at night. I clicked in my seatbelt as he pulled into traffic. "You looked like you were having a rough night," he said after a minute, eyes on the road. I laughed under my breath. "That obvious? You were standing alone by the trash bins holding your shoes." "Fair point." He gave a small, almost smile. It was the first time I'd seen any expression on him that wasn't office neutral. It made his face look different, warmer. I hadn't noticed his jawline before or how calm his voice was when he wasn't just saying, "Hey, you dropped this report." We drove in silence for a while. The city was still buzzing with leftover fireworks and people stumbling out of bars, but inside the car it felt removed, safe. "I'm glad you offered," I said quietly, watching the blur of taillights. "I really didn't want to sleep on that couch." He glanced over at me, his eyes flickering. I didn't want to go home yet. That caught me off guard. "Oh?" He didn't elaborate, just kept driving, fingers tapping lightly on the steering wheel. I waited, wondering if he'd say more, but he didn't. We passed the exit to my place. "Wait," I said. "You just missed my street." "I know," he said. My chest tightened slightly, unsure if I should be nervous. "Where are we going?" He turned onto a quieter road, lined with closed cafes and flickering street lamps. "You said you didn't want to sleep on that couch. I figured you might not want to be alone either." I looked over at him again. His face was still calm, unreadable, but something about the way he said it. Like he knew that being alone wasn't just about a place, but a feeling. I didn't know how to respond to that, so I didn't. I just let him keep driving. And that's when everything started to shift. We didn't go far. Just a few blocks past my apartment, Eli pulled into a small, dimly lit parking lot behind a closed bookstore and killed the engine. For a moment, neither of us said anything. The only sound was the engine ticking as it cooled and the distant pop of leftover fireworks still going off somewhere in the neighborhood. He didn't look at me right away, just sat there, hands still on the wheel like he was deciding whether to speak or just let the silence sit with us. "You sure you're okay?" he asked finally. I nodded slowly. "Yeah, just tired of pretending I'm having a good time." He turned his head toward me. "That party was rough, huh?" I gave a soft laugh. You mean the glitter rave from hell? That pulled a smile out of him. A real one this time, and for the first time I noticed how different he looked without the sterile lighting of our office around him. There was something softer in the way he smiled, like he didn't do it often, but when he did, it was worth the wait. You didn't seem like the party type, I said, watching him. He shrugged. I'm not. My roommate begged me to come, said I needed to, put myself out there. And instead, you ended up being the only person who didn't ditch me. His eyes flicked to mine for just a second. Glad I didn't. There was something in the way he said it. Not heavy, not obvious, but not nothing either. A quiet note of intention beneath the words. I looked away, staring out the windshield at the darkened windows of the bookstore. So what now? He leaned back in his seat. You tell me. Want me to take you home? The question was simple, but it didn't feel simple. And I didn't answer right away. Because the thing was, I wasn't sure I wanted to go home. Not just yet. Not while this strange moment still felt like it could become something. I don't have beer, I said, or snacks. But I do have heat, clean towels, and a couch that doesn't smell like feet. He turned his head again, brows slightly raised. You inviting me up? I shrugged. Unless you've got somewhere better to be. He didn't answer immediately, but the corner of his mouth twitched again, and he reached for the ignition. I'll park. We didn't talk much as we walked up to my apartment. The air was cold enough to sting, but neither of us rushed. The quiet between us wasn't awkward anymore. It was curious, like the space between a question and the answer. Inside, I dropped my coat by the door and flicked on the lights. The apartment was small. Kitchen and living room blurred into one space, but clean, comfortable, lived in. You can sit, I said, gesturing to the couch, or wherever. Want water? Tea? Eli had already taken off his coat and was surveying the room like he hadn't quite expected to end up here. He nodded once. Water's good. I went to the kitchen and grabbed 2 glasses, filling them while I tried to calm the low buzz in my chest. I wasn't even sure why I was nervous. We hadn't crossed any lines. Nothing had happened, but the air between us felt loaded, like something was just beneath the surface, waiting. He took the glass when I handed it to him, fingers brushing mine. Just a second, maybe less, but I felt it. So, I said, settling across from him, what would you be doing right now if you hadn't come to that party? He gave a small snort. Probably watching a documentary about serial killers. Wow. Romantic. I didn't say I was good company. I smiled into my water. You're better than you think. That made him pause. His eyes lingered on mine just a moment too long, like he was debating whether to keep things light or say something else. In the end, he didn't say anything. He just set his glass down and leaned back, stretching slightly. His shirt lifted as he moved, and for a split second, I caught a glimpse of skin. Lean, toned, the kind of body that looked like it came from quiet discipline, not ego. He caught me looking. I didn't look away. Neither did he. Something shifted. He sat up a little straighter, elbows on his knees now. Can I ask you something? Sure. Why'd you really invite me up? I blinked. I told you. Clean towels, non-toxic furniture. Jason. The way he said my name, it stopped me. He wasn't asking for a polite answer, and I didn't want to give one. I looked down at my hands for a second. I guess I didn't want the night to end yet. He nodded slowly, like he understood more than I was saying. Same. We sat in that honesty for a second. Then he said, You ever wonder what it would take to change something? Like what? Like a pattern, a routine, a version of yourself you've been living in for too long. I looked at him, trying to read behind his words. You mean like staying in your lane because it feels safer? Exactly. I hesitated. Then, are you trying to tell me something, Eli? He met my eyes again. This time, he didn't look away. Maybe. My heart started thudding, heavy and stupid. I could have played it safe, changed the subject, laughed it off. But I didn't want to. Not tonight. I leaned forward slightly. Well, if you're trying, you're doing a pretty good job. He gave the faintest smile. Yeah? Yeah. And just like that, the space between us didn't feel empty anymore. It felt electric. I don't know who moved first. Maybe it was both of us at the same time. Some invisible thread pulling us in. 1 second, there was a full couch between us. The next, Eli was sitting right next to me, our knees barely touching, his body angled slightly toward mine. His eyes searched mine like he was still checking if I meant what I said, if this moment was real, or just something we'd both pretend didn't happen tomorrow. But I wasn't pretending. I couldn't. "You ever done this before?" he asked quietly. It wasn't a loaded question. There was no judgment in his tone, just genuine curiosity. I nodded. "Yeah." He gave a small breath of a laugh. "Okay, I haven't." "Never?" "No." I raised an eyebrow. "Not even a college thing? Some drunk kiss you don't talk about?" He shook his head, lips twitching. "Not even that." His hand was resting on the couch between us, palm open. Not touching me, not making a move. But close. I looked at it for a second, then slowly laid my hand next to his, letting our fingers brush. It wasn't much, just skin against skin. But it felt like something huge. "You nervous?" I asked. He smiled just a little. "Kind of." "Me too." He looked down, then back at me. "I keep thinking this is going to ruin something." I swallowed. "Like what?" "I don't know. Work stuff. The way we've always seen each other. What if this gets weird?" I exhaled slowly. "Eli, we don't even talk at work." "Exactly." We both laughed at that, and the tension cracked for a second. Not a bad way. Just enough to let something else in. Something lighter. I shifted slightly, my thigh now fully against his. "It doesn't have to be weird." He looked at me again, and for once there wasn't any hesitation in his face. Just something warmer. Clearer. "You sure?" he asked. I nodded. "Yeah, but only if you are." There was a pause. Then, carefully, he reached out and placed his hand on my thigh. Not high, not suggestive, just there. A solid, simple touch. I could feel the heat of it through my jeans, the weight of his palm, the way his thumb moved slightly as if testing the contact. He looked like he was watching my reaction, waiting for any sign to pull back. I didn't move. I didn't want him to. So I reached out, mirrored him, and rested my hand on his leg. Our eyes locked again, and this time the moment didn't break. He leaned in. Not fast, not all at once. It was slow, cautious, like he was giving me every second to pull away. But I didn't. I met him halfway. The kiss was nothing like I expected. It wasn't wild or breathless or desperate. It was quiet, steady. His lips were soft and a little unsure at first, like he was trying to learn the shape of something new. I pressed into it gently, letting him set the pace, and after a moment, he relaxed into me. His hand moved from my thigh to my waist, pulling me closer until our bodies lined up, heat meeting heat. My hand slipped behind his neck, fingers brushing through the short hair there, and he let out the softest sound in the back of his throat. When we finally pulled apart, his eyes were darker, but still calm. "I didn't think I'd do that tonight," he said. I smiled. "You and me both." We sat like that for a few minutes, breathing a little slower, shoulders touching. The world outside still buzzed faintly. Cars, distant laughter, the soft thud of footsteps on icy sidewalks, but it all felt far away. "You want to stay?" I asked. He didn't even blink. "Yeah, I do." I nodded toward the hallway. "You can have the bed if you want. I'll take the couch." He looked at me for a second like I was being ridiculous. "We just kissed, Jason." "Yeah, but—" "Do you want me to sleep in your bed?" I hesitated. "Yeah." "Then stop acting like we're still at the party." That made me laugh. "Fair." He stood up and held out his hand. I took it. It wasn't about chillin'. Not yet. It wasn't even about wanting more. It was about wanting something true. Something that felt good in a world that hadn't felt good for a while. We didn't do much after that. Just changed into whatever we could find. Me in an old shirt, him in borrowed sweatpants, and lay down in the dark, side by side. Not touching at first. Just existing next to each other, quietly. Eventually, he rolled onto his side and looked at me. "I've thought about this," he said. "Not like this, exactly. but something like it. I turned toward him, propped up on one elbow. Thought about what? He shrugged. Being close to someone. A guy, I mean. It was always there, in the background. Just didn't know if I was ever going to act on it. I searched his face. Why now? He was quiet for a second. Then, you looked lonely tonight. I think I knew how that felt. That hit harder than I expected. Because, yeah, I had been lonely, not just tonight, for a long time. And maybe he had been too. I reached for his hand again. This time, he held on tighter. Morning came slowly, the way it does when you're not ready for it. I woke first. It was still early. The kind of pale gray light that filters through the blinds and makes everything feel quiet. Eli was lying on his side, facing me, one arm tucked under the pillow, the other resting near mine, not touching, but close. His breathing was steady, peaceful. And honestly, for a few minutes, I didn't move, just watched him. Something about seeing someone like that, unguarded, comfortable, unaware they're being watched, felt intimate in a way that nothing else really could. More than kissing, more than undressing, just being. It made something stir in my chest. I hadn't felt that in a long time. Eventually, he blinked awake, his eyes unfocused before they found me. "Hey," he murmured, voice still rough with sleep. "Hey." A beat passed. "You been up long?" I shook my head. "Just a few minutes." He stretched a little, muscles shifting under the thin t-shirt he borrowed last night, and groaned softly. "I forgot how bad I am at sleeping in new places." "You seemed fine," I said. "Didn't snore once." He smirked. "That's a first." We lay there a bit longer, not quite ready to break the spell. The air between us was soft now, not charged like it had been. But something still hummed beneath it, a newness we hadn't named yet. A question neither of us had dared ask. "What time is it?" he finally asked. I glanced at my phone. 8:40. He nodded. "I should probably head back soon." The way he said it, gently, no rush in his voice, told me he wasn't trying to bolt. But I could already feel that subtle shift, the way the real world starts creeping back in after a night like that. The quiet buzz of doubt. The whisper of, "What now? You have plans today?" I asked. He shook his head. "Just laundry and pretending to start my goals for the year," I smiled. "Same." We got up slowly, taking our time like the moment might stretch itself if we didn't look at it too closely. I made coffee while he changed back into the jeans and hoodie from last night. I watched him pull his sleeves down, brush his hands through his hair. He looked different in daylight. Not in a bad way, just real. When I handed him a mug, our fingers touched again. This time, it was brief but charged. "Thanks," he said, glancing at me over the rim as he sipped. I leaned back against the counter. "You're kind of hard to read, you know that?" He looked at me. "Is that a bad thing?" "No. Just makes me wonder what you're thinking sometimes." He set the cup down. "Right now?" "Yeah." He didn't speak for a moment. Then, "I'm thinking about last night, and how I didn't expect any of it to happen, and how I'm not sure what it means yet." I appreciated the honesty, even if I didn't know what to do with it. "Same," I admitted. "I mean, I didn't invite you up expecting anything. I just didn't want to feel like shit on New Year's." His gaze softened. "You didn't use me, if that's what you're thinking." "I wasn't sure if you'd regret it." He stepped closer, not all the way, but close enough that I could feel the heat of him. "I don't," I nodded slowly, meeting his eyes. "So what happens now?" That question hung in the air between us, like it deserved its own time zone. He looked at me with that same calm, thoughtful expression he wore at the office when fixing something complicated. "I don't know," he said, "but I'd like to figure it out." He picked up his coat, slinging it over one arm. "I should go. I've got stuff to do." "But," he paused, fingers running through his hair again, "I want to see you again. Not at a party, just you." I felt something loosen in my chest. Yeah, I'd like that. He smiled. Small, but real. Then he walked to the door, paused with his hand on the knob, and looked back. Text me later? I grinned. Only if you don't ghost me. I think we're past that point. And with that, he was gone. I stood there for a long time after the door clicked shut. The apartment felt quieter, but not in a bad way. Just still. I sipped my coffee, leaned against the counter again, and stared at the spot where he just stood. Whatever last night had been, it wasn't a one-off. I could feel that now. And the way he touched me. And the way he didn't rush out with an excuse. And the way he looked back. Something shifted between us. Something worth leaning into. It took me 3 hours to text him. Not because I didn't want to, but because I didn't know how. How do you follow up a night like that? How do you condense everything that was unsaid? Everything that passed between two people in glances, in silence, in the weight of a hand on a thigh, into a few words on a screen? Eventually, I settled on. Still thinking about last night. Hope your laundry didn't kill the mood. Simple, casual, a little self-deprecating. Enough room for him to decide how much he wanted to engage. The typing bubbles started less than a minute later. Laundry was a disaster, but I kept catching myself smiling, blaming you for that. I didn't realize how tightly I'd been holding my breath until then. We kept texting most of the day. Nothing too deep. Jokes about work, complaints about the weather, memes, Spotify links. But underneath it all, something new was growing, not just flirtation. It felt more like permission to say things we wouldn't normally say, to show parts of ourselves that had been boxed up for too long. Around 7 that night, he sent, "What are you doing tomorrow after work?" I stared at the message for a second, heart bumping in that dumb way it does when someone you actually like shows interest. "Nothing. Why?" He replied. "Want to grab dinner? Not as coworkers, as whatever we are now." That whatever we are now hit me harder than I expected. It wasn't a label, but it was a recognition that something had changed, that we weren't pretending this was just two guys being bored on New Year's. "Yeah," I replied. "I'd really like that." We met at a low-key place a few blocks from his apartment, some cozy ramen bar with paper lanterns and fogged-up windows. He was already at the bar when I walked in, head slightly bowed, scrolling his phone. That same soft hoodie, that same calm posture. But he looked up the second the bell on the door chimed, and his whole face changed, like he was genuinely glad to see me. Not performative, not cool guy casual, just real. "You made it," he said, standing halfway like he wasn't sure if he should hug me or not. "I live 3 blocks away," I said. "Would have been embarrassing if I didn't." That made him smile. Still, we didn't hug, we just sat. It felt awkward for about 30 seconds. Then it didn't. We talked. Not about work. Not about our coworkers. Not about some safe, neutral ground. He asked about my family, and I told him how distant I'd become from them over the years. Not because of anything dramatic, just drift. He told me he was an only child, and that most of his friends in high school thought he was weird because he didn't party. I wasn't quiet because I had nothing to say, he said, twirling his chopsticks absently. I just didn't see the point in saying things I didn't mean. That explains a lot, I said, smiling. Yeah? Yeah, you're not awkward, you're just selective. He laughed, low and warm. Is that what we're calling it now? Dinner stretched into drinks. 1 glass of sake turned into 2. Then we were walking back toward his place under cloudy skies, breath misting in the cold. Our hands didn't touch, but they hovered near each other, like we were still testing the current. When we got to his building, he hesitated at the door. You want to come up? He asked, voice careful. Just to hang out, no pressure. I studied his face. He meant it. No pressure, no expectations, just an invitation. Yeah, I said. I do. His place was small, neater than mine, more plants than I expected, but lived in. He kicked his shoes off at the door and tossed his keys into a ceramic dish by the counter. Want something to drink? I shook my head. I'm good. We settled onto his couch. The TV was off. No music, just the sounds of the city filtering through the windows. Distant horns, the occasional whoosh of a passing bus. He was sitting next to me, not close enough to touch, but close enough that I could feel the heat of him. He glanced at me. I glanced back. And then I said, "I keep waiting for this to feel weird." He nodded slowly. "Does it?" I shook my head. "Not yet." He leaned back, his gaze steady. "Me neither." Then, like it was the most natural thing in the world, I leaned into him. My shoulder touched his. Then, our thighs. Then, our hands. And finally, I rested my head against his shoulder, letting my breath slow to match his. He didn't move away, didn't tense up, just rested his cheek against my hair and let the silence wrap around us like a blanket. And in that moment, I didn't care what label this was. Didn't care what it meant tomorrow, or how it would look to people at work, or whether he'd text me back next time. All I knew was that something had shifted inside me. And him too, I think. Maybe it started the night I stood on that sidewalk, cold and half defeated. Or maybe it started long before that, in the way he used to glance at me in the break room and immediately look away. I didn't know. All I knew was this: he was my ride home. And home didn't feel so far away anymore. The next few days passed like a strange blend of the familiar and the completely new. At work, everything looked the same. Same desks, same flickering fluorescent lights, same coworkers talking about resolutions they were already breaking. But for me, something had changed. It was subtle, almost invisible, but I carried it like a secret, a warmth just beneath the surface. Eli and I didn't act differently in the office. We didn't text during meetings, we didn't linger at each other's cubicles or steal glances across the room like we were in a teenage movie. If anything, we were careful. But there was a moment, Wednesday afternoon, just after lunch, when I passed him in the hallway near the printer. We brushed shoulders, paused for a second, and he looked at me with this quiet, knowing expression. Nothing dramatic, just the faintest curve of his lips and the soft heat in his eyes. That look stayed with me the rest of the day. That night, he came over again. No big plans, no expectations. Just two guys sitting close on my couch, watching bad TV, quietly finding comfort in how easy it was to just be around each other. At one point, he slid his hand into mine without a word. It felt like breathing. By the time the weekend hit, it was almost like we'd slipped into a rhythm neither of us expected but both of us wanted. We didn't talk much about what this was. Not yet, but there was a kind of mutual understanding, like we were both letting it take shape on its own. No pressure. No need to define it before we knew what it even felt like. Saturday night, we ended up back at his place. He'd cooked. Well, cooked was generous. It was boxed pasta and frozen garlic bread, but he set the table, lit a candle, half a joke, half a flex, and played some old indie playlist through his Bluetooth speaker like we were in a hipster rom-com. After dinner, we sat on the floor of his living room with our backs against the couch, drinking beer straight from the bottle and talking about everything and nothing. He told me he used to write music in high school, that he played guitar but hadn't picked it up in years. I told him I used to draw, that I stopped when I started taking jobs that paid in stress and coffee instead of fulfillment. "It's weird," he said after a while, "how easy it is to forget who you were before life got loud." That stuck with me. After a while, we both went quiet. Not awkward, just thoughtful. The kind of quiet that makes you want to lean into someone, not away from them. And I did. I leaned into him, head resting on his shoulder. He tilted slightly so we fit better together, his hand brushing over my forearm, fingers grazing gently. His thumb made slow circles against my skin. Barely there, but grounding. It was the simplest thing, but it undid me a little. There was something about the way he touched me, not demanding, not assuming, just present, like he was trying to memorize the shape of something that had always felt just out of reach. At some point, I turned toward him and kissed him again. It wasn't like the first time. That had been cautious, exploratory. This was slow, anchored. His hand slid behind my neck, his mouth warm against mine. And we stayed like that for what felt like hours. Kissing, pausing, talking in between. Little nothings. Breaths and confessions. He whispered that he hadn't told anyone yet. Not friends. Not family. No one. You're the only person who knows, he said quietly, fingers tracing the curve of my jaw. I didn't say anything right away. Then I just said, okay. Because what else do you say to something that sacred? I don't know what this is yet, he added, eyes flickering, but I want to keep figuring it out with you. I nodded, throat tight. Me too. We didn't go all the way that night. Neither of us said it out loud, but it felt like we both knew there was something good in the waiting. That the slow build was its own kind of intimacy. We undressed down to boxers, climbed into his bed, and lay tangled together. Legs overlapping, skin warm against skin, breath sinking in the dark. It wasn't about lust. It was about trust. About feeling seen in a way that felt safe. Held. He kissed my shoulder once, barely there before we drifted into sleep. And maybe it sounds small. Maybe it sounds like nothing. But I woke up hours later to the quiet rise and fall of his chest beside me, and the only thought in my mind was this. This is different. Not like any other hookup or fleeting flirtation or night I'd tried to forget the next morning. This was something real, and I didn't want it to stop. By the time Sunday rolled around, everything still felt fragile in the best way, like a snow globe that hadn't settled yet. Not chaotic, just full of motion, possibility. I stayed at Eli's that night, too, without even discussing it. It just happened, like breathing or blinking, or that automatic pull you feel toward the person your body has decided is safe. We woke up wrapped around each other, his knee hooked over my thigh, his forehead against my temple, both of us pretending we weren't already half awake just to stay in that warmth a little longer. You hungry? He mumbled, voice gravelly with sleep. Starving. I have eggs and cereal, but the milk might be questionable. I smiled against his skin. Sounds perfect. We spent most of the morning barefoot in his kitchen, bumping into each other, stealing bites off the same plate like we'd done it 1,000 times before. I sat on the counter. He stood between my legs. We talked about nothing. We laughed about everything. At one point, I wiped a smear of egg yolk from the corner of his mouth and said, "You're getting kind of domestic on me." He raised an eyebrow. Scared? I shrugged. Kind of into it, honestly. He smiled then. One of those rare full-body smiles that changed his whole face, like he was letting himself be seen, not just looked at. It hit me harder than I expected. The next week at work was weird, but not in a bad way. We still didn't act different around anyone else, but the air between us had changed. There were more hallway meetings than we needed, more excuses to walk past each other's desks. His smile when no one else was looking. The way he bumped my foot under the table during a dull meeting and then stared at the screen like nothing had happened. People started asking questions, but not the ones I feared. They asked if we were working on something together, if we were suddenly tight, if Eli had finally made a friend in the office. I just smiled and said, yeah, something like that. Friday night, we were back at my place. He brought over takeout and a hoodie I'd mentioned I liked. Just casually handed it to me when I opened the door and said, "Figured you'd want it more than me." It was soft and oversized and smelled like him. I put it on and didn't take it off all night. We sat on the couch after dinner, not watching the movie we claimed we were going to start. His fingers traced lazy patterns on the back of my hand as we lay tangled in a blanket. "Can I ask you something?" I said, turning slightly to face him. He nodded. "Was this always there? Like, between us?" He was quiet for a second. Then he said, "Not always, but I think I noticed it before I let myself admit it." "When?" He smirked. "First time you fixed the jam copier and didn't brag about it," I laughed. "So basically 2 months ago." "More like 6, he corrected. "6? You serious?" He shrugged. "You were always just there. Always. Calm. And I think I started looking for you without realizing it." Something about that landed deep. "You know what's wild?" I said. "What?" I almost didn't go to that party. He looked over at me. Yeah? I was this close to bailing. Staying home. Watching fireworks from my window with a bottle of whiskey. He smiled softly. Well, I'm glad you didn't. Me too. The movie kept playing in the background, but we didn't move. Didn't talk much after that. Just sat there, quietly letting it be whatever it was becoming. At some point, he leaned in and kissed me. And this time, it wasn't cautious or hesitant. It was slow and deep and full of that unspoken electricity that had been building all week. His hand slid under his hoodie, and wrapped around my waist like he was trying to anchor himself there. We didn't rush it, didn't strip everything away all at once, but we let it happen. Clothes fell to the floor in pieces, laughter and kisses tangled in between. We moved like we were learning each other by feel, by instinct, by intention. Not perfect, not choreographed, just real. Messy in the way that only something wanted can be. And afterward, as we lay tangled in my sheets, chest to chest, sweat cooling between us, he whispered something against my collarbone. I didn't know I could feel this comfortable with someone. I didn't say anything right away, I just pulled him closer. Because I knew exactly what he meant. Later, when he was drifting off, half asleep with his hand resting over my heart, I found myself staring at the ceiling and thinking about that night again. The cold sidewalk, the missed ride, that quiet voice offering, "You need a ride?" At the time, it felt like luck. Now I wondered if it was more than that. Some things you don't see coming. Some things you don't even know you're waiting for until they show up, in the form of a quiet guy with calm eyes and the softest hands you've ever felt. And sometimes all it takes is one moment, one yes, to change the entire direction of your life. We didn't talk much the next morning. Not because anything was wrong, but because nothing was. Eli woke up first this time, his arm still draped across my waist, his chest warm against my back. I heard him shift, then felt his lips press lightly between my shoulder blades. No words, just that soft, grounding kind of contact that made my throat tighten. I didn't open my eyes for a while. I didn't need to. His presence said enough. Eventually we stirred. Coffee was made. The radio played something old and slow. We passed each other in the kitchen like we'd done it for years, occasionally reaching out to touch, a hand on the hip, a brush of fingers at the small of the back. Small things. Easy things. He sipped from my mug like it belonged to him. I didn't mind. "You good?" I asked, after a stretch of quiet. He leaned against the counter, shirtless, hair wild, eyes softer than I'd ever seen them. "Yeah," he said. "I really am." There wasn't some big moment after that. No dramatic declarations. No sudden urge to put a label on it. We both knew we weren't going back to what we were. But we didn't need to rush into what came next either. We just let it be. Over the next few weeks, people at work started noticing we were around each other more. Again, no one asked anything pointed. But someone did catch us one day, after hours, in the parking garage, standing closer than two coworkers probably should. Eli had leaned in to whisper something stupid about my playlist. I laughed and nudged him, and a motion sensor light flicked on. We froze for a second, then shrugged it off. Neither of us apologized. Later, in the car, he said, "You scared?" I looked at him, really looked at him. "No, not anymore." He smiled. "Good, because I don't want to pretend." We're not. And we weren't. Valentine's Day crept up faster than either of us expected. We hadn't talked about it, we hadn't really defined anything. But when I got home that night, he was already waiting inside with Chinese takeout and six-pack and a card that said, "Still your ride, still changing everything." It made me laugh. It made me ache a little, too. I pulled him in for a kiss right there at the door. We ate on the floor, watched a dumb horror movie, fell asleep in a tangle of limbs and half-finished fortune cookies. And I realized then this was it. Not a fantasy, not a dream, just something real, something rare. Months passed. We started spending most nights together, alternating apartments like it was a formality. We learned each other's quirks, his inability to fold laundry, my complete disregard for alarm clocks. He liked soft music in the morning. I liked silence until coffee. He always drove. I always picked the music. It was messy. It was ordinary. It was everything. One night in April, we took a walk through our neighborhood just after it rained. The streets were slick with puddles, and everything smelled like earth and quiet. He held my hand openly. No one else around to care. But even if there had been, I think he would have done it anyway. At the corner, we stopped under a streetlight, and he turned toward me. "You ever think about that night?" he asked. I knew which one he meant. All the time. He studied me for a moment, like he was remembering the version of me he'd first picked up from that sidewalk. "I almost didn't ask," I smiled. "I almost didn't say yes." He squeezed my hand. "Glad we both did." "Me too." We kissed under the streetlight. No fireworks, no loud music. Just two people standing still, in the middle of the street, in the middle of something they never saw coming. He was my ride home. But home, I realized, wasn't a place anymore. It was a person. It was him.